Hello, fellow bibliophiles, and welcome back to Blatantly Bookish. I'm Marissa, and today I am joined by my husband Andy to discuss Emma by Jane Austen. So, a few years ago for Jane Austen July, I convinced Andy to read his very first Jane Austen novel, and that was Pride and Prejudice. And then every year since then, he has read one Jane Austen novel, the group read, I think, after Pride and Prejudice. And so this year he has just finished Emma, and I am so excited to discuss it with him.
Yeah, I loved Emma, if I can say that at this point. There's no point in comparing it because I had a great experience, but I know last year when we talked about Sense and Sensibility, I talked about it a lot in terms of the context of my experience with Pride and Prejudice, because it was all I knew, right? So my universe has expanded a bit this time around. So cards on the table when we start. I adored this book. I have no reservations about it like I did last year, and I couldn't be happier to say that, because I don't know if this is your favorite Jane Austen. You certainly talk about it a lot, and it comes across to me like it is.
Favorite. I think it's my second favorite, and that's just because Pride and Prejudice has such a special place in my heart. Emma is probably Austen's best novel, but Pride and Prejudice is more dear to my heart in a lot of ways. I don't know.
That makes sense to me. I don't think I'm overly influenced by you. I think that's really how I'm feeling about it too. I think Pride and Prejudice was a great choice to be my first one because it will always stick with me as the first one I read, very special to me that I had that experience with it, that it opened up a door to Jane Austen's world and thoughts in reading it. And I loved it. I thought it was absolutely wonderful. But I was getting the sense while reading it and kept thinking Emma being it.
Yes.
I was getting the sense while reading Emma and holding off until I was done before making any grand sweeping statements, just thinking, I think I like this better. I think I like this better. And as it went on, I was like, I have more reason to say it now. This feeling is not going away. So it's hard. I think, as the dust settles and I think about it more, it could be that I say something almost exactly the same as you, that I think Pride and Prejudice is my favorite, but Emma winds up being the one I think is sort of the best in some other kind of objective sense, whatever that means.
Yeah.
But it was a really great experience reading this book, and it makes me... I was excited at the end of Pride and Prejudice for the next Jane Austen July. I was excited at the end of Sense and Sensibility for the next Jane Austen July. And it has happened again with Emma. I mean, I know I can read whatever I want, whenever I want.
Yeah.
But it's a fun experience to be able to kind of join in with the broader stuff and be part of the fun.
It is. And I always joke that, I've never done a Jane Austen rankings video. And that's because my favorite Jane Austen is the one I read last. Or it seems that way to me. Whatever I finished most recently, I will rave about as basically my favorite. So... Or at the very least, as it's grown on me, or I see its merits even more.
That's where I'm at right now. So I'm happy to talk about the book. I know usually what we've done in the past with these is just kind of, talk about characters or themes. Is there anything that jumped to mind you wanted to ask me specifically first? Because otherwise I could just talk about Emma for as long as you want. I loved this book.
Yes. Well, so there will be spoilers for Emma in this if you haven't figured that out already. But yeah, one thing that I want to talk to you about is the plot twists of Emma. Did you get sucked into Emma's narrative? Were you aware of the plot twists? Just listening to you read the book and chat each chapter about the various things was so entertaining. He had so many different theories about each of the characters and where the book was going as the story progressed. So
yeah, I think it was, it's hard to say how I reacted to quote unquote plot twists, and more in an overarching sense, I was really gripped by the characters and by the plot. And so, you say, talking about my thoughts while I was reading it, a lot of what will stick with me about Emma was, after almost every chapter, feeling compelled to put the book down for a second interrupt you and need to say to you, this just happened, I can't believe this. And sometimes I would then rant and rave about, like, what does that mean, who was going to meet who, what was that all about.
Yeah.
And apparently I was kind of right sometimes, even if I don't remember
Well,
all of them because they were in the moment. But when we talk about plot twists, it's more natural revelations is how I think of it.
sure.
And I was exactly where I expect Jane Austen wanted me to be with each one. And I was so, because they feel so real. And I know
Yes.
I've said that, and that's the thing I love most about Jane Austen from my limited view into her work. Granted, it's expanded by, I watch all your videos, so I know more than the average person does. I
Sure.
go la 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 when you get to spoilers sometimes, so I get, I get to still go into all these blind. Um, but they feel so real. And I think part of the reason I had to stop and talk to you about what it meant and what people were thinking is since they're so fully realized, every word on the page that was a piece of dialogue was dripping with what did they mean by that and their
Yeah.
motivation. And I wouldn't say something like, it wasn't some like intrigue, like nothing's as it seems, but it's more the way humans talk. That where they come from is informed by how they're feeling. And I was constantly thinking, why was that what was said? Like,
Yeah.
what investment do they have in this moment?
I guess I was just so impressed by you because most people, including myself, the first time reading Emma, you get really sucked into Emma's narrative and Emma's perspective and her view on the world. You know, Mr. Knightley seems like the voice of reason, but you really trust Emma, and that's the beauty of the book. She's completely oblivious to Frank Churchill, to Jane Fairfax, in many respects to the plight of Miss Bates and what's going on with her financial situation. Emma is in her own little sheltered world, and as a reader, the first time around, I was completely sucked into that, and I think many people were. But I feel like you were able to see through that, and you were able to really understand the characters the way somebody does on a second or a third read. And I don't even think you remember this, but you predicted the plot with Jane Fairfax and Frank Churchill.
I do remember that in particular, mostly because you reminded me of that immediately when there were revelations. But I will say, I'm not clairvoyant, right? So it's
Felt like
a
you
lot
were.
of a lot of what you're saying, though. I really did have the experience you
Yeah.
said for several of those things. I was along with Emma in, for example, going off things you just said, not like fully clicking with me just how dire Miss Bates' situation might be.
Yeah.
That was a key one that was like not always at the front of my mind. With Harriet kind of entertaining the possibility that she really might be of, you know, a gentleman's daughter of higher birth, that kind of thing. Even if I didn't think it was likely, it
Right.
remained in my mind as like, this is possible, right? So you
Yeah. And I
entertain
mean,
it.
theoretically, it would have been. It's just incredibly unlikely.
Yeah, yeah. With Jane and Frank, I will say, kind of broadly, with my experience reading or consuming any kind of art, I'm cursed with a hyperfixation on Chekhov's gun, and I think a lot of my read into a potential relationship between Jane and Frank came with their introduction, and simply that they were presented as people who mattered to me at similar times, even though I hadn't met either of them yet when they first get introduced. And I had this association of the two of them together. And then it didn't help that I didn't particularly like either of them on their introduction. But, you know, to use the name of another book, or the not actual title, but working title of another book, my first impression on them really lingered. And with Jane, it ended up being very unfair. And I think that's another example of being a reader who's sucked into Emma's world, though, right? I mean, Emma is very frosty towards Jane Fairfax, thinks that
Yeah.
all eyes are upon her, doesn't fully understand the allure of Jane, finds herself, I forget exactly what it is, she refers to her as like elegant, but only that, like talks about her dress, or like her manner of dress is the only compliment she ever offers her. And I was really just kind of along for the ride with that one. And a lot of it has to do with, if Emma is not our lens, we certainly see the most of her. And so what she has to say about people tends to be something that lingers with us, right? With the case of Frank, to say what I said before about their fully realized characters and the way that they speak matters, and what they say matters, and why they choose it in that moment. Frank, however, hit me by his own actions as I bought nothing of what Emma had to say about the goodness of Frank, the sociability of Frank. I loathed this man from the jump,
Yeah.
and I ended this book thinking that he is my most hated of any character in the 3 Jane Austen novels that I have read.
You know,
I cannot stand Frank. He might be one of my most hated characters in fiction. I hated this guy.
so, I mean, I'm not exactly a Frank Churchill fan, but I just...
That would be weird.
No, it would be weird. But I just don't think people have as negative a reaction to him as you do. Like, I've never met anyone who hates him, truly hates him as much as you do.
And to put a point on that, I mean, I think more than anything that made me stop what I was doing and mention to you something I was reading in the book was me seething at something Frank Churchill had just said. I would say that was like a good half of the things that made me stop to talk to you in the middle of the book.
Yes, pretty much.
You know, and I really think that stems from the way he's written, right? He's not, and I hate to say something like traditional rake, because what the hell is my perspective into this? How many examples do I really have of this? But, you know, it's less that he has, you know, like really harmed someone or like done like impossible to recover damage or like a fiend. But to me, there's something completely inexcusable about what I see in Frank is understanding people well and using that understanding you have to manipulate isn't even the right word, but it's like a game to him. Like it's amusement for Frank. Just to be part of this society, la 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 da da. The only thing that actually matters here is I'm spending some time with Jane. I don't care that I'm hurting Jane. I don't care that I'm hurting the people around me. I'm just listening to them, feeding them what they want in the moment in a way that makes me look good. It's so false. It's the inauthenticity of it that just rubs me the wrong way.
Yeah.
You know, and what did I say? It was I remember I was talking to you, said in Dante's Inferno, treachery is a deeper circle of hell than wrath, right? And so it's like just the idea that someone through their dishonesty, their falseness, is more evil than someone who is full of rage and actively out to harm for the sake of harm. There's something wanton about his behavior that drives me crazy.
Yeah, and I think Frank has so much fun with Emma because he thinks that's what she's doing too, which it just isn't at all. She has convinced herself at a certain point in the book, of course, that she has developed feelings for him and that what they're doing is genuine when he, you know, takes her declaration of the idea that she'll never marry to mean that she is interested in playing with him.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
that's not what's going on in her mind, obviously.
Yeah. And there's a lot of ways I react to that. I think that's a really interesting point you've made, because I think that's true, which is also a misread that Frank makes in the course of the book, right? And I think it's one that happens kind of paradoxically from Emma's immaturity, right? So Emma fancies herself as this person who has that kind of deep insight into the people around her and their motivations and their desires. And Frank has a better insight. He uses it for evil. But Frank rightly sees that Emma fancies herself that way, but seems to miss the immaturity. And I think, and it's only in talking about this right now that I'm making this distinction, I think you're exactly right that he sees something of himself in Emma, mistaking that immaturity for, if not malice, amusement, right? But it's not that she's using her powers for evil or for being self-centered. It's that she's not fully cooked in her understanding of being in society. And that leads to a lot of the most difficult situations in the book. I mean, I was ready to scream. I remember when she is so cruel to Miss Bates in the later third of the novel.
The box
I
Elson.
remember my jaw dropping, and telling you, specifically, I can't believe what Emma just said, but then skipping over that immediately and going, I hate Frank. It is entirely his influence that felt at all natural, and it all like something we would be laughing about to say something like that. The blood is entirely on his hands. Like it's
Well, I mean, I think Emma is responsible for her own actions as well.
yeah,
But,
yeah,
the point that you were making, that you don't think Emma would have ever said anything like that or acted that way towards Miss Bates had she not been around Frank or under the influence of Frank.
Yeah. If she carries a moral weight from that, which she does because she is a person with agency, but if she carries a moral weight from that, it's one of negligence through immaturity, of being sucked into something, and not one of outright wrath. And we know this because she is mortified almost immediately. Granted, it is with the prompting of Mr. Knightley that she fully realizes just how mortified she should be of her actions. And, while there are foils all over this novel.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, one of my favorite parts of Emma is how every single character is there to be a foil, to be a mirror for another character. And you can almost read any character in Emma as a mirror or a foil to every other character. And most of them directly towards Emma. So, there's Mr. Knightley and his influence on Emma versus Frank Churchill and his influence on Emma. There's, just comparing Knightley and Frank Churchill together. There's, Jane Fairfax as a foil to Emma. There's even Miss Bates, you know, the fact that she is an unmarried woman. Emma would never be in her position because of the wealth of her family and all of that. But in a different circumstance, she easily could be Miss Bates. They're not that dissimilar from each other.
Yeah. And part of what I love about Jane Austen, what I love about Emma, is that these characters are so rich that we talk about them like they're real people because they really are presented with that level of complexity. And I mean, not to get too philosophical, but I think people can find common ground, and there's reflections in people we meet and shared themes and life stories. And I talk about people like art because that's how I see things, right? And I think that holds true in Emma. You're exactly right. Every single character can be foiled, compared, held up in contrast to, in some way, shape, or form, with any other character through some lens. Whether it's Miss Bates, the marriage position, or something that comes to mind between the two of them is Emma kind of often views herself as the most important perspective in the room at all times. And she makes fun of Miss Bates in that horrible moment for voicing her opinion all the time, right? And it's like, well, who really is the one who does that most of the time? Emma. What makes Emma so interesting, amongst a multitude of reasons we don't have time to get to, even if this video were 5 hours, is that it is a really unique society in how small and close-knit it is. That you really get the sense that everybody knows everybody. That even extends in a way that the other books I have read so far, and I don't know about the rest of her novels, that even extends to people who are, servants. Like, this is the first time I was given the actual name of someone who works in service to any of these people. And there were a couple of them in this book, which was interesting, even if they don't get, brought up many times or we talk to them directly. But, I say all of this to say their relationships are different. And, if this were a very large town, or if it were set in London, as opposed to just people going there sometimes when it's narratively convenient, maybe they wouldn't interact the way that they do. But because there's these handful of people who are in close society at all times, I think I think they have a genuine affection for each other that's not purely from proximity, but I think proximity allows for that to bloom when maybe some of those friendships wouldn't have existed in a different kind of neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, I think the small town feel of Emma really does cultivate a perfect environment for Jane Austen to really explore characterization
Hmm.
and interactions between characters in a way that she doesn't quite achieve in other novels
Hmm.
because of the broader scope of the other novels.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I'm excited to see, and I know I've said this already, but I will be reading the rest of the books. I'm always excited to see what she does that is unique to each book I read, regardless of
Yeah.
what it is in particular like. Um, I realize some of this conversation stemmed from bringing up Mr. Knightley's name, so if
Yes.
I can talk about him just for a minute.
Go for it.
In contrast to Frank, I had an immediate warmth for Mr. Knightley, and I think his beautiful trait is like Frank. I think he understands people really, really well. He seems to be the first one to have figured out everything and to understand where people are coming from. But he is consistently warm, and he doesn't want to harm anyone, and he would never use this insight the way Frank does, wantonly for amusement. It's always for the betterment of everyone around him, which you see shades of that in Emma. I think Emma's quote unquote matchmaking really does stem from "Wouldn't this be nice?" as
Yeah.
opposed from "Look how great I am." I actually think very highly of Emma, which I understand might be a little like
Yeah.
not
So
like
a
not a
lot of
common feeling,
people
but
that I've talked to about Emma don't like Emma as much as you or I do.
hmm
I've always had a soft spot for Emma and felt that she means well, even if she's a bit misguided at times. Um, but other people read, I believe, a little more malice and a little more, well, I do read snootiness into her. I was going to say snootiness, but they
hmm
read a little more malice into her than I do.
yeah, yeah. I read no malice into Emma. I mean, at worst, like I said, that moment where she makes fun of Miss Bates, which is so mortifying,
Yeah.
is the most malicious moment she has by a wide margin. Like there's a reason that that's a moment that gets dwelt upon, and she reflects on, causes Mr. Knightley to speak to her. There isn't an analog to that elsewhere in the story. You could say that she makes mistakes because she does. I mean, one of the things that has the biggest ramifications in someone's life is the way she manipulates Harriet into shooting down Mr. Martin, which is just such a shame and incenses Mr. Knightley,
Yeah.
rightfully so. But would never read any of that as like snootiness, malice. I read that as well-intentioned mistakes. She's
Well,
young. She's learning this stuff. And I think Mr. Knightley sees in her the capacity to smooth off those
yeah.
rough edges of those understandings and meet people where they are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so you say she's learning, and I think one of the things that she is learning, though, is in some ways the class structure um, of Highbury. And I think that, by the end of the book, she has learned that in a different way. And so I think some of what we or I view as snootiness is actually sort of an elitist view, a classist view of what's going on around her as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
And that's in some ways encouraged in the book and rewarded at the end.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I would be remiss not to acknowledge that, there is, I think, an underlying, if not endorsement, acceptance of a classist view of society in
Yeah.
Emma. I think that's a pretty prosaic point.
Yeah, and in Jane Austen in general,
Sure, sure.
but especially in Emma, I think.
I kind of yeah without the full context, but with the ones I have read,
Of the
that
ones you've
the
read.
the way that this story is told and what the narrative turns around, it makes sense to me that those elements of class would be more central maybe
Yeah.
than in some other books. But you know
I wouldn't say more central, but just almost this moralistic.
Yeah.
I mean, you can read Emma as Emma learning about class structure and coming to terms with it at the end.
Yeah, yeah.
It is one way to read Emma.
Because I think a modern reader can read the end of Harriet's story and just be sad that they will now grow apart, and this closeness that was built that Emma did a lot to ruin, but in the end kind of mends for Harriet to give her a good life, then leads to kind of a significant parting of ways that doesn't have the same warmth that their relations would.
And
there's
I spent many years being sad about it.
Yeah.
But in reality, I think that's in there to show that Emma understands her world more clearly now, and that she made up with Harriet in the appropriate way for someone of her station.
Yeah, maybe it's not the most admirable way for me to feel, but I'll admit the way that I choose to read it is I kind of inhabit the not real headspace of how Jane Austen must have thought about class for that to be a positive ending, and kind of accept it as they're in the place where they should be. It's where there's like a meta level of, okay, I can read this as a good ending, where if I thought about this, that really happened, that would be a sad ending. But in the fiction of the fiction, but it's meta fiction that we're talking about here.
You adhere to certain rules of Regency Society.
I accept it.
In the book,
Exactly. Let's see, what else would we, like, there's so...
Can we talk about Mr. Elton?
Yes, we can talk about Mr. Elton. I also hated Mr. Elton.
Well, that's not an unpopular opinion.
But he made me laugh a good deal.
Yeah. You predicted the proposal scene.
Oh yeah, I did. That was one of the ones when Emma was setting up, thought she was setting up Harriet with Mr. Elton.
Yeah.
I kept saying, he likes her. He likes her. Everything she's doing. He thinks this is about her feelings for him. Like, this is not working, Emma. You are not as good at this as you fancy yourself. What are you doing? And then when Mr. Elton proposes to her and she's aghast and she's so confused, I'm sitting there like, yeah. He's like, I'm gonna go to town and get this framed, and it's because you drew it, and it's such a great drawing. And it's like, Emma, he doesn't care that it's an image of Harriet. He cares that you made it.
Yeah.
She doesn't get it. Completely doesn't get it. And it creates for a funny moment. You know, I found a lot of levity in it. But I will also say, I find a lot of malice in his character, to talk about the malice I don't feel in Emma. I mean, one of the most disdainful moments in the book to me was when he doesn't dance with Harriet. And it's funny because when I read Pride and Prejudice, I did not give Darcy as much grief as I should have. I have come to understand, while getting a little more steeped in the norms of the society at the time, right? But now I know to read that as the really huge slight that it is, which also makes Mr. Knightley come across as so gallant to recognize it and need to rectify it and come in and offer his hand for the dance immediately.
Yeah.
But, you know, Mr. Elton is a character who I think, in order to do that, I find incredibly distasteful. That's just mean. That's just rude. No one is served by it. It doesn't make him feel any better, and I found it very, very low. And I think he ended up with the perfect person for him. Mrs. Elton just would not stop talking.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how much I have to say about her other than I was largely amused by her while thinking, oh, good Lord, I loathe this person. But I find it funny that I do.
Yeah. I always loathe Mrs. Elton. I weirdly found her strangely redeeming in one of the adaptations. And it wasn't even that she was redeeming. I like read into it strangely and just thought of her in a different way for a brief second. I talked about it a bit in the video. You'll watch it later after we watch Emma 2020 together. But I talked about how I don't know. I thought of her in a slightly new light.
Sure. And it's so interesting you mentioned adaptations. My head was just going to adaptations for some reason when you started talking. And I will say I am so excited to now be able to watch some adaptations of this because I really, really want to see what aspects of these characters people choose to focus on, how the different stories get told. And for the record, I watched Clueless with Marissa about 10 years ago. I mean, years and years ago.
You don't even remember it.
I mean, we had barely been dating, I think, when I watched it. It was one of the first movies we watched together. Yeah. And I had not read Emma. I was vaguely aware that it was either an adaptation or a loose adaptation of Emma when I watched it. And I remember liking it and having nothing about it stick with me, which is great because now I get to watch it, and instead of being a movie I watched years ago and thought was a fun time, to getting to see how it lines up a little bit, which is really exciting to me to get to see. I love the idea of taking these characters and putting them, or if not these characters with these circumstances, into a different kind of society and seeing how they work. It's very exciting to me.
No, I think you'll like all the adaptations. And Emma, I feel like Emma has the most adaptations apart from Pride and Prejudice. And I love how...
That's great.
It is great. But I love how much Emma is adapted. And I think it just lends itself to adaptation because it's all about interpreting these characters and, you know, how they interact with each other and focusing on different aspects of that. And so, you know, each adaptation does it a little differently, and I'm just so excited to watch them all with you. I wanted you to get, you know, all of your thoughts out about the book itself, you know, without being skewed or colored by those adaptations for this video. But I think you'll really enjoy them all, and so we'll watch them all. We will.
Yeah. A few random thoughts about Emma, just because you raised the idea of seeing how some of those thoughts could play out on screen and stuff. Moments that stick with me from reading to share with people. And now this is going to be so bad, I'm going to forget the character's name. Frank's aunt, the controlling aunt, I can't remember. Churchill.
Just Mrs. Churchill.
It's just Mrs. Churchill, right? Okay, Mrs. Churchill. Funny moment of reading. I had that. Oh, she passed away, and everybody was. My first thought was, "Oh my God, he killed her," which is not a Jane Austen plot point.
That is not a Jane Austen plot point.
It's mostly I say. It goes to show you just how, like, low in my esteem Frank was, that my very first thought for this sociopath... It's like, you know, the... no, finish your thought.
Because of how much you hate Frank Churchill, I did think more about, you know, his absence from Highbury and, you know, the necessity of visiting his aunt so much and all of that. And I'm wondering if it's a story he tells, if his aunt isn't even that bad of a person or that demanding, but his excuse to Mr. Weston, I mean, because we always hear about her through Frank or through Mr. Weston, and Mr. Weston hears about her through Frank. What if Frank is just making up her character?
He is. There's
nothing to indicate that in the text. I never think about that until you hated Frank so much.
The proof is that Frank is a detestable little... I don't swear on your channel, but yeah, he's bad, and he's everything is presented in a way that it works for him. So I mean, look, she might not be the greatest person ever, but like, she's probably not as controlling as he says. I mean, Mr. Knightley puts it best when he says, you know, a gentleman, you know, this guy of his station, if he needs to go about the rightness of his business, he does that. You know, you do not get held back by somebody who says something that is, you know, a bad thing to do when the rightness is right in front of you. The context of that was attending his father's wedding, you know, where he's like, at the very least, you got to come visit within a week. And Mr. Knightley is the only one who gives absolutely no leeway for this. He's like, this is ridiculous. This guy has never come to visit. Like, if he is true to anything he says, which he isn't, he would have rejected the control. Like, even if it was true that she were that controlling, which I have my doubts. And, you know, it's presented that Mr. Churchill gives in to or approves of the engagement with Jane kind of out of this emotion that stems from the recent passing of his wife. But I'm also left with the feeling maybe these two people would have approved more readily than he admits to. It's a weird jump. It's a strange jump to go from absolute certainty that there will be pushback to, oh yeah, I asked and it's okay.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, I mean, I remember also in that scene you're talking about, Emma not understanding what Mr. Knightley is saying. And I think a lot of that is very gendered because as a woman, she is held back by other people's whims and wishes in that way. She has a duty to other people in a way that Frank Churchill doesn't. And as Mr. Knightley says, he doesn't have to listen to them.
Yeah. I think,
if they're even demanding that of him.
And I want to make sure that I give due credit to Emma in that moment, because I don't want to, and this isn't even what you were applying. I just want to make the point that there's nothing, that she's held back by her gender in that moment. And I don't think Mr. Knightley has insight into that specifically because of his gender. I read it more as a maturity of understanding beyond something that Emma is incapable of understanding without a man's guidance. I think it's one of those immaturity examples. I think, and I could be wrong.
No, I
could just
mean
be
that
wrong,
she would be held back in the same situation.
Yes, and that's where we agree completely. I was just clarifying because she would be, but I do think that the immaturity comes across in not understanding that unfairly there is a different set of rules at play between the two of them in those moments. Other stray thoughts about Emma. I remember when the piano showed up.
Yes,
I remember immediately saying to you, Frank bought this stupid piano and he didn't think it through what anyone was going to say. Or worse, he did. Just the level of not caring at all about the ramifications of his actions, or again, or worse, knowing exactly what the ramifications are and finding them just funny enough to not matter. I can never give him a pass for all of that. And I do chalk up my read into that in that moment to my aforementioned impossibility of letting go of Chekhov's gun in everything I consume. There was just something about what is the connection between these two people, and now we have some unexplained event. Sure, it's an unseemly relationship with someone who no one is acknowledging to, and no, it's Frank. It's obviously Frank. But something we didn't get to talk about, which I just am actually curious about your thoughts on, because if there's one thing in Emma that I have a lot of questions about, it's the moment when Frank goes to leave the first time for an extended period, and he stops to say goodbye to Emma, and it's described in the book, and if I could find the page, I'd look up exactly the way it said, but there's this moment where he stops and he looks out the window and he has this moment of seriousness, and Emma reads it as he's about to say something, and is he going to admit to his affections to Emma? And in hindsight, I think, and he does say in the book, and I actually believe him, he was considering admitting his relationship with Jane to Emma. I've admittedly found that somewhat confusing, maybe because it doesn't jive with what I think of Frank, and credit to the complexity of the book. Maybe there are layers to even detestable people who I have a personal dislike for that I can learn more about. I don't know if that comes from the true belief that there was a kindred spirit in Emma, the way that she pokes fun at everything, and he sees
it,
and then wanted to have a moment of sincerity with her because of her lack of seriousness. That's a kind of person I know in real life. In some ways, that's a kind of person I am, except for the evil part of it. But the jovial thing and finding seriousness through humor, right?
That is how I always read it. Yeah, to be honest.
But it's just so strange because there's that level of secrecy that's being held the whole time, and it's like, does Frank really see her as a true potential confidant? Now, granted, he doesn't follow through with it. Um,
Right.
but merely the visible temptation, and I have no reason to think that that wasn't what he was considering telling Emma in that moment. I really
Yeah.
don't, because it's the only thing that makes sense that would be on his mind. Um, but it just, I mean, if I really do mean it, I'd love to hear what you have to
Well, I mean,
say
you
if you have
actually, the
thoughts on
reason I
that.
said that's how I always viewed it was because you summarized what I think about it
You
pretty
do think so?
perfectly.
Okay.
I always thought that he does form a real connection with Emma, or he thinks he does, and that what she views as them courting is actually him developing a deep friendship
Friendship.
with her, and that he feels like
Yeah.
they're kindred spirits in some way, and
Yeah.
that he was considering opening up to her a little
Yeah.
more.
Yeah. And, you know, I take all of that with his letter at the end that Emma reads and then is willing to, like, find, you know, absolve him for some level of understanding, if not outright forgiveness. Man, we love doing understanding, if not forgiveness, with characters at the end of Jane Austen books, don't we? But I was reading that letter thinking, this was an example of, oh, Emma isn't there yet with emotional maturity because this letter is terrible. And then she hands it to Mr. Knightley with all this, look, now you'll finally understand what Frank was about. And Mr. Knightley reads it exactly as I read it. He's like, uh-huh, uh-huh,
No.
stopping every paragraph, like, can you believe this guy? Can you believe this guy? And Emma's like, oh, yeah, it's
Yeah.
exactly how I read it. No, but okay. So I'm glad that in that moment that has caused some level of confusion in me. You have like potentially a similar read. What
Yeah.
frustrates me is I think in the tens of hours that you and I have discussed Emma while I was reading it or right after I completed it before this and all that, I've not had a single damn nice thing to say about Frank Churchill. And now in the
You have
half
not.
hour-ish content that people will have of my thoughts of Emma on the internet for all time, I've devoted a good 5 minutes of that to the redeemable moments
Now,
of Frank
you've
Churchill.
actually made me wonder if some adaptations have made me like Frank Churchill more than I otherwise should from the text. Yeah.
Yeah. We talk a lot about how adaptations can sometimes color our understanding, and I think
Yeah.
to an extent, philosophically with adaptations, to an extent I think that's fine because my interpretation of books get colored by being in conversation with you,
It's
and
true.
in a way I'm merely in conversation with the people who put together this other art version of it, right, to add
Yeah.
to my understanding. But at the same time, there is no adaptation that will make me like Frank Churchill. That's not something. It is not
I
something
don't know
possible to
about
do.
that. I like what they do with Frank Churchill and Clueless.
I'm so excited to watch Clueless. But yeah, there's or at the very least, we always talk about how it influences how we read books in the future. You know, there's
Yeah.
certain things that linger with us that add context and color. I don't think on a future reread of Emma, there's any version of me that will
No.
be charitable towards Frank because I
I
really
don't
do
think
think
so
he's
either.
I really do think he's in the running for most detestable character in fiction that I've ever read. I hate him, and I want to be clear about that since I just had some moments of humanity because he is a human, and these are real characters. That's how we're talking about them. But let me just be very clear: I hate him.
I'd love to know in the comments if you hate Frank Churchill as much as Andy does. Because, no, seriously, I
Yeah.
really just don't think people
Yeah.
hate him quite as much.
They
Yes,
should.
they hate him.
They should.
Yes,
should.
they don't like him. But, you know, even in ranking Jane Austen's rakes, I don't think he ranks that high up for some people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It probably doesn't, and I think it's easy to say that because you know what he had a rude afternoon with Miss Bates. He had an improper engagement.
I think
But
what he does to Jane Fairfax
does it?
is the worst.
He puts her through.
He puts her through
and
a
that's-
lot emotionally.
And that's what I'm saying. I don't forgive that. I think that even though, look, he didn't murder someone, or did he? He didn't murder anybody. He didn't, you know, run off to Ireland to, you know, and like get out of wedlock. All that.
Gretna agreed, but yeah.
There's none of that stuff going on with Frank, but there's that level of like real human evil. Like I think, and maybe part of what I find so detestable about Frank is that like I really feel like I could meet him, you know, like not like a comic book villain, not like somebody on a
You feel like he's the
fantastical
most
TV show.
real rake.
Yeah, I feel like he's the kind of guy who, like,
so far for you.
In the tapestry of our lives, when you tell stories looking back on your life of the people who really rubbed you the wrong way and who really you just could never connect with and you can't believe they have an existence that's like that, in contrast to your own, Frank just feels like the kind of person that I might look back on and go, man, what a jerk. Again, I'm trying really hard to hold back my normal language. Yeah, I only go on about it because one of the central things for me with Emma is how much I dislike Frank and how strong he stands in comparison to Mr. Knightley, who I love. And I started talking a bit about how much I love Mr. Knightley and the warmth. And it's fun to talk about things that are bad. It's fun to talk about stuff where we can, joke on them like that. There might not be as much levity to say, I was moved by Mr. Knightley. And did I tell you I cried at the proposal when I was reading the chapter?
Oh,
you weren't here when I read it.
I wasn't here
And it's so
it.
funny because I thought to myself while I was reading it, I was like, this, we again didn't, like, spoilers to Pride and Prejudice, we again really didn't get too much of it. We got a lot of Mr. Knightley's about to propose, and then we got Jane Austen's narrative being like, what a great proposal, and so they were engaged. But the bits we got leading up to it was so real and so moving. My heart was so in it.
She's a brilliant author in both what she tells and what she doesn't.
Yeah, I was able to be moved by my own understanding of what that moment was and how it felt for them, and I adored it. And I really loved that because if there's one thing that Pride and Prejudice had over Emma that moment kind of subverted was the idea that my heart was in Pride and Prejudice in the way that my heart wasn't in Emma. In Emma, it was peak entertainment and intrigue and desire to find out what happened with the plot, which was kind of how I was feeling with Sense and Sensibility, except without as much true investment and fascination by what I was reading. Yeah. And then when that relationship, if there was any revelation that felt, surprising to me, truly, it was the understanding of the warmth that was always there the entire time that I hadn't picked up on fully. I saw that he cared, but the emotional resonance of the care that he had for Emma really, really moved me in that scene, and it allowed it to be an engagement and a marriage of love as opposed to an engagement and a marriage of happy ending, this is complete. There was an emotional resonance to that moment that elevated Emma again, which allows me to have the conversation coming full circle to where we started this of, do I like it more than Pride and Prejudice? I might, and because it then gave me at the end the one thing that the whole time I was thinking, well, Pride and Prejudice moves my heart, and what I like is having my heart moved, and then it did it. Then it did it.
No, it's one of the great proposals.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think back, there's so much that I have to say about Emma. I don't know if there's any more that you wanted me to say specifically, but for me, those are some of the biggest things.
Book complaining about Frank Churchill.
I did. This is an accurate representation of my feelings on the book. Loved it. Everybody was so organic. I felt like I really knew everyone. I hate absolutely everything about Frank Churchill. I love absolutely everything about Mr. Knightley, and I don't see the malice that other people seem to see in Emma, and I find it confusing that people see that malice in Emma, quite frankly. Those are my big thoughts.
Some people just get really annoyed by her as a character.
Yeah, there's an innocence to it. I use the word immaturity, which comes across as even more negative than I intended to, but I truly mean that in inexperience. There's a youngness to Emma. There's a there's a youngness and a freshness to her, innocence. And that's what I like so much about her character. Yeah, innocence, and I think innocence in that the idea of matchmaking is a form of meddling that is one that inherently stems from the joy of others. I think at its most,
she does want to take credit for it.
Yeah, I was going to say.
And it is to occupy her because she's bored.
At its least charitable, you can say that it's a vehicle to show her superiority by being smart enough to call something. And I just simply don't see that as the primary motivator for her, because even if there's an element of that, then she chooses to do it in the way that, in her mind, will bring joy to people. Of course, she sucks at it, and she brings a lot of unhappiness to a lot of people, including herself, for extended periods of the book.
Right.
And this is the
The
rising
entire
and falling
plot of
action
the
of the
book.
entire plot of Emma.
Yeah.
But at no point do I ever think, and I'm excited because I remember Clueless was in high school and all of that. Like, at no point did I get that kind of quote-unquote mean girl vibe from Emma that I think I hear bandied about a little bit, because even though I've never read these Jane Austen novels, I have watched all of your videos and know far more about Jane Austen than the average person who has never read a single book because of existing in this house with you. But I didn't get any of that. I saw innocence, and I am charitable towards Emma. I am. And I loved her. I loved so many characters in this book. I loved everything about this book. I loved laughing. I mean, little things. I loved laughing at Mr. Woodhouse. I loved...
Yeah, we didn't even talk about Mr.
No,
Woodhouse.
I mean, there's every character in the book I could spend an hour talking about. I loved laughing at Mr. Woodhouse. I loved thinking about how Miss Taylor's influence on Emma's childhood led her to being who she is. Yeah. I loved thinking about how, Miss Bates' situation, once I started to understand the gravity of it more, colored the atmosphere in the house and the way that Jane wore her situation. That it wasn't all Frank, that it didn't all come from malice, that it came from observations around her. The organic nature of society. I loved just the simple descriptions of where Mr. Knightley lived. And, just after the whole book of being so focused on these particular areas, and then seeing Downwell and the idea of, like, he sets out his collections for Mr. Woodhouse and imagining these things, and just there's this depth and this liveliness to it, which makes me start to understand why there's so much what amounts to fan fiction around Jane Austen stuff. Yes. Because there's a richness to all of this, and I go shotgun through all of these things that stick out with me, because this is the case for anybody, no matter how small their role in the book. I see them as a fully realized person, and they gave some experience to me. I just think this is just simply one of the greatest books that I have ever read. Yeah. And I'm so thrilled that I read it. And I was so scared, knowing how much you like this book, that it would be overhyped for me, and I would be underwhelmed by it, and I would be a little crestfallen in expecting something that it didn't end up providing. But dear Lord, I love this book, and you sharing it with me. As soon as I started deciding I would read every book the years with it, I was so excited when we got to this one, because I know how much you like it. Yeah. What a great experience. What a great experience. And I'm
so glad that you liked it as much as you did. I was so excited for you to read this one, because it's such an amazing book, but also because I wanted to see how you viewed these characters, and what you were able to glean from them on a first read, and how you would be able to see through things or not. And it was just really, really enjoyable listening to you read it, except for how much you complained about Frank Churchill.
Yeah. I'll take all of that as a compliment, because at the time when you were thinking of me as clairvoyant, you were getting very frustrated at my theories. You were like, just finish the book.
Just finish the book. I can't hear you talk about Frank Churchill anymore.
I can't hear you talk about this anymore. Just finish the book so I can tell you what happens and we can talk about it. Yeah. But for me, and from where I'm looking at this, I think that's not everything I have to say, but that's everything I have to say in this context.
That's everything we should say tonight.
Yeah, I think so.
So we'd love to hear in the comment section down below what you thought of Emma, not just Emma the character, but any of the characters in Emma. Did anything we say resonate with you? Do you completely disagree with us? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And until next time, I'll see you in another bookish video very soon. Bye!